Well, howdy there. You have stumbled your way into the MTG Thoughtcast and the Outlaws of Thunder Junction pre-con reviews. You're watching one of a four-part from our podcast episode, who you can find the links to in the description below, along with a playlist to all the other decks of this cycle from this set. We're real excited to have you here. Enjoy the show.
Let's get into a quick draw. This is a classic Is It Spellslinger list from the Thunder Junction precons. The face commander of this thing is Stella Lee Wildcard for 1 and Is It. It's a legendary creature, human rogue, 2/4. That says whenever you cast your second spell each turn, exile the top card of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play that card. So the better impulse draw is what you get off her. And then she has an additional tap ability, copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. Activate only if you've cast 3 or more spells this turn. So this works really well with any kind of Is It Spellslinger strategy that you can think up. That you get to copy your stuff, you get to do more of your stuff. That's what you're trying to do.
Yeah, it's like a love letter to Is It. It's like anything that you could want to be doing in Is It, Stella Lee just kind of like throws a little bit of gasoline on the fire there.
Exactly. It's not going to hurt your strategy. I definitely think there are better commanders for this strategy, but this is a commander that you can absolutely play and run
instead.
What?
Just play Mizzix instead.
Yes, dude. Way more fun.
This is a great card in Mizzix, I think. Like
so Is It, I feel like Is It as a color identity has a stronger color identity than any other pair. Like
true.
You can look up any of the other Is It Spellslinger commanders on EDHREC and they will almost all be viable as a commander for this deck. So just kind of experiment with whatever you want to. But let's get into the rest of this thing. The other commanders that you could run here. The new one is Eris, Roar of the Storm for 8 and Is It. That's blue-red. So legendary creature, Elemental Warlock. Notably not a wizard. That does matter in this deck because there's like a weird wizard sub-theme. The abilities on this creature, this spell costs 2 less to cast for each different mana value among instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. Then it has flying and prowess. And then it says, whenever you cast your second spell each turn, create a 4/4 dragon elemental creature token with flying and prowess.
A lot of stuff going on in that.
This thing has so much happening. I don't love this card. I don't know.
I want to know why they didn't make it 2 less to cast for each mana value in your graveyard and that you own in exile. Because there's a ton of flashback in this deck.
Yeah, there's a lot of it. There's so many ways to get cards out of your graveyard that this will be uncastable most of the game. So yeah, you're never getting this off. It's also not a wizard, does not synergize with the rest of the deck. So we'll get to cuts later, but this is one of the cuts that I recommend actually. So moving on.
It's kind of cool, I suppose, that like if this were to be your commander, its own ability of cost reduction can help you bypass commander tax sometimes.
Totally.
That is true. It's definitely one of those commanders that suffers from it's just in the color identity, but it really belongs in its own deck.
Yeah. It's good after a turn 1 Faithless Looting, though. Like, if you turn 1 Faithless Looting, dump something that costs 2, dump something that costs 3, all of a sudden he costs 6 less.
That's true.
So, there's that.
But that's, like, perfect scenario.
Exactly.
So
wait, we don't base our opinions off of Magical Christmas Land? Perfect scenario?
That's how you level up your gameplay. Stop building decks like that.
Also completely off track from instants and sorceries, but it's a big dumb elemental that makes elementals go really cool into like an elemental cascade deck.
True.
That could be sick.
Cascade does cast 2 spells.
Who knows? I don't know. Moving on.
That was the perfect anyway.
All right. This is a reprint, but you could run it as the commander and it would work. It's Kaza, the Royal Chaser for blue-red. Legendary creature, human wizard. That is a good thing. Flying in haste. Taps. The next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn costs X less to cast, where X is the number of wizards you control as this ability resolves. So some of the wizard sub thing comes from this card. So the more wizards you cast and have on the field, the better this card becomes. But even still, this card is a mana dork and is it with haste. So
very good.
That's dope. We take those in this color.
We take whatever we can get.
we need that. At first I was like, what the heck is this doing in here? And I was like, yep, that's exactly what that's doing in here. It's if it taps for 1, that's a great thing, which it will because of Kaza. So the next legendary creature you could run as a commander, but why not just build a better version of his deck? Niv Mizzet Perun, the legendary dragon. Dragon Wizard 5/5 for 6 CMC, 3 blue, 3 red. Pretty hard to cast this card, but this card is an absolute bomb if you can get it off. This spell can't be countered, which is amazing because if you're going to make me pay 3 blue, 3 red, I really want it to work. It has flying.
Good point.
Yeah. And then it has whenever you draw a card, Niv Mizzet deals 1 damage to any target. So it Orcish Bowmasters every time you would draw a card, which is sick.
That's hot.
And then whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, you draw a card. So whenever a player, so it counts herself, so the more spells you do, but also your opponents. So this card's amazing. This card is one of the best spellslinger commanders that you can run because it just functions off of card draw. You don't have to build this in a weird, I'm going to make tokens somehow thing. You can just draw cards and win the game. That's going to be better. That's just a better way to play this.
Ironically,
and
anti-synergy with Stella Lee because Stella Lee impulse draws. You
I know.
Cast from exile, not draw a card.
So you guys remember I said this was a pile of reprints earlier? This is a good example.
Also, the cowards didn't even put Curiosity in the deck. If you're going to put Niv Mizzet Perrin in the deck, he immediately comes, like, if you unsleeve Niv Mizzet, there should be a copy of Curiosity.
It should. He should actually be a dual-faced card. No, that wouldn't work.
Veyron's in the deck, too.
Yes, Veyron's incredible.
Bring us back on the rails.
Thanks. Yeah, Veyron, you can also run as the commander. I think that's the last one in the box that you could pull. It's a 1 and is it for a legendary creature of a Freet wizard. So it synergizes with the wizard sub theme too. It's a 2/2 with Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, Veyron of Duality gets +1/+1 till end of turn. And then it says there's a typo. If you
casting or copying,
you're right. Reading this too.
We're totally both reading.
Okay,
if you casting. Oh no! If you casting or copying an instant or sorcery causes, it is grammatically correct, but it sounds weird.
We are being pushed through the meat grinder that is the English language right now.
Yes.
If you casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. This is basically Panharmonicon for instants and sorceries.
Yep.
Dude, they should make keywords like that, where it's like Panharmonicon, and we just all know what it does.
Yeah, dude, let's get even more enfranchised.
Let's go. I mean, it's your game. Keywords. You can do whatever you want.
Let's just bring a dictionary with us.
Yes.
A glossary of all the
they already did Outlaws. I'm like, you have to remember now what an outlaw is. That's like 5 different types of creature that aren't connected in any other way. So, I don't know. I think we all know what a Panharmonicon is. So,
Tell me about some new cards in this deck, Jared.
Yeah, let's talk about some new cards. I'm a little feisty on this one. Sorry, guys. you get Jared unfiltered.
It is genuinely frustrating that they've been doing so well with these precons. Like, you bought all 4 of the LCI precons because they were all unbelievable because they were thematic, really
never
good
buys
decks.
Sealed product. I don't buy sealed product. I do not.
They've been doing so good. Like, at least none of these decks have a reprint that's worth more than $10 in it. Like, there's, for someone like me who's like, I buy the precons so that I get another copy of Soul Ring, another copy of Command Tower, like all these things. I buy them as collections of cards. I'm like, cool, I at least get like there was a black market connections in the pirate one. Like, these don't have anything like that in it outside of decent land bases.
Yeah. Especially this one too, because if you're not interested in playing Spellslinger, none of these cards are for you. They don't go in anything else.
No.
They're all Spellslinger cards, and they're all just like...
That's a really good point. It's hyper specific.
Yeah, it's like they're all reprints, but they're a deck that can't go anywhere else too. It's really weird. So anyway, not to rag on it too hard, let's get into some new cards. We've got, as far as new cards I like, Crackling Spellslinger is one that's been getting some attention online. I think this card is actually really dope. It's 3 and 2 red for a human wizard, 2/2 with flash. Says when Crackling Spellslinger enters the battlefield, if you cast it, the next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn has Storm. That's crazy. The degenerate red player in my brain just like can't help itself. It's just like it hears the alarm going off and it's like it wants to pull the lever. Yes. I want to storm a finale of Devastation or something. Like that would be...
Dude, I want to storm a Jessica's Will. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
dude?
or something like that. That would be like insane. Like,
yeah,
just the possibilities are endless.
But like, okay, talk to me about paying 5 mana for a 2/2 and then still having mana up that you've played spells before this and then played this and then played a spell to give it Storm.
We'll get into this. So if you build Storm the right way, this card's totally fine.
Yeah, you have nearly infinite mana.
You can totally do this. You can absolutely play like 3 rituals in a row and it'd be all good to go and storm off in a turn. Not the way that this deck is built. So in this deck, this card is not very good. But in other decks that actually build around the theme of Storm, this deck would be very good. So this is not a reprint, but it's a card that is like if you need enough of the other cards in here, buy the deck and just take what you need. Any thoughts on Crackling Spellslinger before I move on to the next one?
Nope. I just want to know how the Murders at Karlov Manor, the disguise precon got a Jessica's Will, but this deck didn't.
Dude,
that's all I want to know.
I'm like shaking my head at this deck. This deck is just like I don't want to be too negative. I literally just like wrote very disappointed at the end of my notes.
Yeah, I feel like we're doing a pretty good job here talking about the cool things about it, but also going like it's weird and pretty bad.
Yeah, we're gonna shoot you straight because it's Thunder Junction, baby.
Great. These are our thoughts. This is the Thoughtcast.
My next card out of the new ones that I thought was pretty cool is Thunderclap Drake. It's 1 and a blue, and it's flying. Instant sorcery spells you cast are 1 less to cast, so that's huge for you, especially you're trying to get those cost reductions on board. I think that is a good thing they do in this deck is they print a lot of cost reducers for your instant and sorceries, which those are cards that a lot of people, if they're building their collection, like honestly, if you're trying to build your collection and you want these kinds of cards, these are good decks for that because these are a lot of just like weird commander staples that you're going to need them at some point. You're going to wish you had these cards. But back to Thunderclap Drake. So for 2 and a blue, sacrifice Thunderclap Drake. And when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell, this turn, copy it for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game. So this is a way to kind of set up a really interesting play. So you can have it on board and save it for later it's just there cost reducing until you need to absolutely just do the craziest turn. So I think that's really cool. It's kind of like putting plot on a creature, but it gets to stay on the field and do something the whole time it's plotted.
I could also see this seeing play in something like Rogak Silas in higher power, maybe not quite CDH, but like something to where any of these like you get extra value for the number of times you've cast your commander is really good with partners. And especially one like Rogak that costs 0. So
yeah,
also Thunderclap Drake just makes me giggle every time I say it because I don't even like Drake that much. So moving on.
Dude, that was I was not expecting that at all.
Everybody's got the shots to fire in the quick draw deck.
That was hilarious.
Next card, please.
Forger's Foundry. I actually really like this card. This card is pretty sick. Kind of saves this deck for me, honestly.
Yeah.
It's 2 and a blue. It's an artifact. It has tap, add a blue. When you spend this mana to cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value 3 or less, you may exile that spell instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard as it resolves. So you still get to cast it if it's 3 or less. It just exiles instead. And then it has a second ability that says 3 and a blue tap. You may cast any number of spells from among cards exiled with Forger's Foundry without paying their mana costs. Activate only as a sorcery. So you could just store up all of your stuff that you've just been casting as normal, all your cantrips, all your low CMC cards that you should have a lot of in a deck like this, and then just you're like, okay, I'm just going to storm off now, because this kind of fixes the storm problem where until you can actually get to the point where you can reliably storm off, you're kind of in this like weird rocky middle ground beginning stage of your strategy that you can get blown out really, really easily if someone can stop you from even getting to like the precipice where storm will even work as a strategy. So this is a really neat card. I think it's really cool, and I'm actually really stoked to play it.
Do you want to hear a really disheartening stat about this deck, though, with this card in it? The average mana value in the main deck without lands is 3.28, which is just above the threshold that this mana rock wants.
Just gonna cut out real quick.
Yeah, there's good things to be done with it, for sure, but somewhere else, I think.
Wizards is smoking the stash that the Outlaws should be smuggling away.
Also, again, this card puts instants and sorceries that would be going into your graveyard into exile, which is anti-synergy with Eris.
Yeah, it's pretty weird.
It redirects where he wants instants and sorceries to be.
He's like,
you do get to eventually cast them. Like, what's cool with this is
forever in your hand like that.
Totally. This takes those cards from exile, and rather than because you don't get infinite times of doing that, like it casts them from exile, which will then put them in your graveyard. So they end up there eventually.
Yeah,
it's the bullet ricocheting around a little bit.
Yes,
it's just one of those things that's like when you start relying on cards being in different places too much, you never have them in the places you need them to be when you need them there.
Yes.
So if you need cards in exile or in graveyard and in your hand, like it just becomes this weird thing. And yeah, it's like you can see a strategic soup when it's there. It starts to make no sense when
strategy
it makes no sense.
Soup is such a good descriptor for these precons.
Yeah. Let's see. That was some new cards that we like. As far as let's talk about some upgrades that we can do to this deck to make it a little bit more focused and a little better. This deck, in my opinion, you could kind of gut it and go anywhere you want. It is kind of just a shell of Spellslinger, and that's no knock to it. That's what it is.
Yeah.
But Spellslinger can be built very differently depending on what you like to do and what power level you're aiming for, because that's like something you can do at a CDH level very easily with a lot of the same cards. So you got to kind of walk that line carefully. Yeah, let's talk about some upgrades. Joseph turned me on to a good one, the Passionate Archaeologist. Let me pull that up here.
Assuming you're going to keep Stella Lee as the commander of the deck, and you're going to be consistently every turn casting a card from exile. Passionate Archaeologist. This is the guide for the upgrades. Is out of the box, you're keeping Stella Lee as the commander. Here's a few ways to make it juice up a little bit.
Yeah, with that caveat
Passionate
that we are
for sure
building around Stella Lee. So, legendary enchantment background. It's 1 and a red. Commander creatures you own have whenever you cast a spell from exile, this creature deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to a target or to target opponent. So that's awesome. It synergizes really well with that Forger's the artifact I just read that I can't remember the name of. there's a lot of things in this deck that actually do cause you to cast things from exile.
Like Passionate
Stella.
Archaeologist with Mizzix's Mastery is crazy because that just exiles all of them and then casts them all from exile. There's also both finales are in here too. Like Finale of Promise does the same thing.
Yeah.
Someone must have been listening to your top cards. We were playing Commander.
They're like, oh,
Dude,
dude, this is
the fact that two of those cards made it into precons.
I know, dude.
A week after we talked about them.
I was like, that's kind of crazy. Next, after Passionate Archaeologist, the next card we're going to talk about for an upgrade would be Remand. That is an instant. If I can pull that up.
Yeah, because we talked about this before the show, but there's there's one counter spell in the deck. And having something like a Remand gives you access to a counter spell when you need it, but then also if you can remand something of yours to then cast it again.
Yeah, it's really excellent
with storm cards.
Yeah, exactly. If you actually do build this, you take this in more of a storm route because this deck actually only comes with 1.5 cards that have storm printed on them.
I like that 1.5
because technically the crackling whatever wizard person that comes in this deck can make a card storm, but it doesn't give it. It's like you have to fulfill the stipulations to make it happen. So to read off Remand, for those who don't know, it's a 1 and a blue counter target spell, and then if you do, return that spell to its owner's hand and draw a card. So yeah, super good in this deck. It gets you card draw. It gets you more interaction because here's the thing: if you're playing blue, people think you have interaction. So you kind of have to have it. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy where if you are the blue player and you don't have interaction, people are still going to play against you like you do. And they're going to focus you and target you and probably counter more of your interact with more of your board because they're kind of expecting that interaction back from you. So especially because like if you are playing a deck that is in blue colors that has consistent card draw and you are allowed to kind of lean into what blue does well is control the game, like there's no reason not to do that here because that just allows you to more effectively win the game when it's your time. Because I think that's something that at the heart of this deck, I don't like the build identity of it is it kind of derails Spellslinger, where it's like the whole point is to kind of go off and win. But this deck is trying to accumulate like small value over time by making tokens. It's like making Spellslinger into a token strategy, which is the complete opposite direction that it wants to function in. Not that there's anything wrong with
it's definitely one of the lower power options that you can do for Spellslinger.
It's good to have a board state, but it's also good to know when you're just derailing from your main idea and it's just hurting the overall synergy of your deck. So a recommendation from us is to take it in more of a traditional Spellslinger route and actually put more instants in this deck.
Things like Frantic Search also just like make this deck crazy good. 3 mana
and
for an instant. Draw 2, discard 2, untap 3 lands. So like anything that's like free is gonna get you to that 2 spells a turn.
Exactly. Our last upgrade recommendation is an Offer You Can't Refuse. It's another counter spell. It's amazing. It's an instant for 1 blue, counter target non-creature spell. Its controller creates 2 treasure tokens. So this gets you out of a bind in a pinch, and it's also not crazy expensive,
and you can counter your own stuff if you need the mana.
That's true. That's a weird thing you can do.
I mean, if you're at a place where you're like, I've got 7 cards in hand, I'm holding a Ponder and an Offer I Can't Refuse, and I'm looking to impulse draw with Stella Lee.
Yeah,
so
that's actually a very
I've made my 2 treasures back. I've cast my 2 spells. It's been free, and I've drawn a card with it. So
in these kind of strats, you can actually legitimately play those kind of lines, and they work for real. So that's a pretty cool line that you can do. Let's make some cuts to this deck. And those we've kind of already mentioned. One of them, Eris, just kind of anti-synergy with a lot of what this deck is trying to do. Even though it kind of on the surface looks like it is synergistic, it's a sneaky one. The next one is the Terramander. This card is really Really bad. Is this like
Best case scenario is you get a 5/5 flyer. Best
this
case.
is a Ravnica reprint that no one wanted. Like, why is this in here?
Don't stop reprinting these weird uncommons, Wizards.
Like,
We don't want this clogging up the deck.
He's just a little guy.
If we can't even we can't even do it's like for a draft or like limited environment because it's in a pre-con.
It wasn't even good
deck.
then, dude.
No,
I played with Terramander. It was not good.
That
then.
was
It's
never.
not good now.
I'm like, this is just kind of insulting to reprint. Like, honestly, I'm like, what are you doing? This is a waste of people's money. And then the next card, Leyline Dowser. I have no idea what this card is even doing in this deck, or what it's supposed to do at all. I don't actually understand what this does.
Yeah, with 0 top deck manipulation, it just becomes 3 mana mill a land.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know what it is, it's 2 mana for an artifact that says pay 1 mana and tap this card to mill a card. That's a lot of work to just put a card in your graveyard instead of just playing any of the blue cantrips
that
would
card
just put
is
it
an
in your...
instant or a sorcery, it does go to your hand. But also, there's 19 creatures in this deck, and like a lot of artifacts and a couple enchantments and 38 lands. So I think your odds of hitting there's 30 instants and sorceries built in, so it's a 1 in 3 chance.
In a perfect scenario.
In a perfect scenario that you've 3 mana drawn a card.
Bad.
You could play Brainstorm instead.
Dude, Brainstorm, literally,
Yes.
it is Storm. Play Brainstorm instead. Oh my! I didn't even have that in my upgrades because it's too obvious.
Yes.
That's like that was.
Since we've upgraded another one, get Winged Boots out of here, dude. What are we doing with Winged Boots? 2 mana for an equipment that equips for 1 and gives something flying and ward 4.
What is that supposed to do in this deck? I don't know.
It's not better than Lightning Greaves. So, and they're clearly fine with reprinting Lightning Greaves.
Not even much better than Swiftfoot Boots, honestly.
No.
It's just like this deck especially, I think, is the crux of like, what were they doing when they designed these?
I don't know, man. They just like had a deadline and they're like, well, these decks make money, I think. Yep.